Om Indram Mitram Vernam Agni Atrato Divyahasa Suparna Gurutaman Ekam Satvi Prabhuda Vadanti Agnin Yaman Matarishvanamahu Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. That one nameless, formless essence, whom the sages and seers bestow with many holy names, like the waters of life, the fire of yoga, the divine atmospheres, the carrier of consciousness, the devourer of death, the eternal companion, and the one who shines forth the light. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. So welcome to our Saturday Satsang, ongoing for weeks and weeks now, and we hope to do it into the future ad infinitum as we all gather for discussion of truth in this hour and then an hour's break, and then at 10 o'clock, that is Hawaii time, it's early morning here still, we'll have the God Blogs discussions. And that's our Saturday morning events on our ASR, Ashram of the Subtle Realms, where since we can't always gather together in person anymore at the physical ashrams on the West Coast and here in Hawaii, then we do it here on the screen to help facilitate the growth of spiritual life, which is the main need and the divine requisite of all illumined souls who want to wake up, stay awake, remain awake in the insomnia of yoga, as our founder Lex Hickson used to say. Always remain in that center of mother consciousness, at the very core of intelligence and surrounded by her arms of love. So that's what is what we do every weekend together, and then during the week we enter into the fields of karma yoga as selfless service, or as Swami Vivekananda used to say, love as labor, work as worship. And then we try and come together in these moments of silence and therefore practice the 4 yogas of bhakti, karma, jnanam, and raja, or meditation. The new religion of this age, he called it, the 4 yogas. So he's putting a very strong accent on that, along with the Advaita, which will become the future religion of thinking humanity, he says. So we knit together this inimitable path of Advaita Vedanta with Shaktism in Ramakrishna order, and have Shakta Advaitavada, the path of those who, inside of Mother, realize that non-dual Brahman that's at the heart and in the mind of all beings. And that being our boon from her and our great blessing, then we move forward to try and share it with others. Like sharing mangoes, as Sri Ramakrishna said. Some Paramahamsas do that, others keep them silent and secret inside themselves. So whatever the case may be, Jivan Mukta, Videha Mukta, we appreciate both kinds of beings. And we go seeking and searching deep within their hearts and minds for keys to penetrating through this all-pervasive, world-bewitching Maya, and find a way to live in that third eye, or in that indivisible state of consciousness, which we meditated on here in the early morning at 5 a.m. just a few hours ago. And beautiful meditation we had. Personally, I could hear Divine Mother's bell ringing, but there was no one ringing any bell around. So that's all inside. And there's where you have to go then. You have to take the outer into the inner, and then take both outer and inner and merge them into one indivisible state. Meditate on that state, pass your time contentedly, and be free, as we hear from Shankara. Om Drisham Pratitam Pravilapayan Sanmatram Anandaganam Vibhavayam Samahita San Bahir Antaram Va. So Bahir, the external, Antaram, the internal. Render them into one state and meditate on that in peace and in bliss. Then in charm of delusion shalt thou cease to be. O great Mother of the worlds, be our salutations ever unto thee. So with these beautiful sentiments coming at us from all quarters, we wonder why the world isn't placing themselves underneath that waterfall of Shiva's grace. It's constantly pounding down upon his matted locks as he protects the world so that he can destroy it all later, because it was all just a figment of our imagination anyway. So it would be better to live at one with Shiva and Shakti so you can see all this divine play going on and not be drugged from birth to death and death to birth, as Vivekananda says. Be conscious of every movement, every divine movement. And we can do that by being one with Divine Mother. So my usual preamble of a few minutes before we get started, asking questions, sharing insights, whatever we do here at Satsang. We have a good dozen or more people gathered. More are coming probably from Europe. They're going to sign on soon, I think. So we have a good widespread, far-flung Sangha in SRV, as if Mother's casting a net over the whole world with just like Indra's jeweled net, where he can see through every facet of the net into all facets of creation. And so SRV is rather like that and is gathering forces all the time. Come join us. The lotus is blooming in the woods. Do you need an engraved invitation? As Ramakrishna used to say. The bees will come flocking. And that's what SRV is. It's a huge lotus. It's growing and gaining force. And we are all bees buzzing around Divine Mother's collies, black hair. In and out we go. In union and in separation, because both of them are blissful. So if I haven't transported your minds too high by these words, maybe you have something to say and contribute to our satsang today. Who's going to start? I think probably Nikhil is. He's speechless. But he's thinking.
Namaste, Babaji. I've really just been contemplating the sheaths more, the coverings, and how it's almost like a game that we've just played with ourselves for time unimaginable. Like we are that self within, and then for some reason we decided to cover that self, and now we're just uncovering it again. And that part I'm beginning to understand why spiritual growth happens in stages, because you're taking coverings off kind of possibly one at a time or a number at a time, but they don't just all come off rushing unless you you've done this lifetime after lifetime and came here knowing. So I don't know if I particularly have a question, but it's just more of a reflection of how beautiful that is, and how as you get closer to that, you just get closer to this position of witness consciousness. And then from there, there's still this sense of separation, but there just must be this moment where there's just no more separation. You're just absolutely one with all, and all your coverings are gone, and you're still in a body, so something is still covered. But yeah, I don't know, my mind gets a little bit just washy there. Like and I think it's because it's the mind trying to comprehend it, and the mind can't comprehend it. So
Yes, they used to gather around Sri Ramakrishna, and they would want to be like him, and they would beg him for some sort of vision or some sort of experiences. But often when he handed those out, which was very rare, and it was only at the behest of Mother Kali that he did that, then they would come rushing back and say, please take these experiences away. I can't go to work. I can't function. So you have to be careful what you pray for, in a sense. You have maybe a new definition of that when Sri Ramakrishna came to earth. For instance, we had one great soul in India told Sri Ramakrishna, I want to dive into the ocean of Brahman and immerse myself there and swim to the farthest shore and never come back. And Sri Ramakrishna said, oh, Keshav, because he was speaking to Keshav Chandra Sen, the head of the Brahma Samaj. He said, oh, Keshav, don't do that. Dive in for sure and immerse yourself, but please do come back for the sake of all them. And then he pointed to all the people that were around who hadn't had such divine experiences yet, and who were still having to work to remove those very same coverings you speak about, because some of these coverings, the covering power of Shakti is called avarana, and there's also a distorting power called vikshepa that goes with it. So avarana and vikshepa Shaktis are formidable powers to be dealt with by people who are trying to remain free of coverings. So it's a wonderful vision that you described there, and probably not all that practical for the greater percent of human beings in the world today in this Kali Yuga, because no one's really interested in Dharma and nobody really loves God. So in Sri Ramakrishna, we saw someone who really truly loved God with every fiber of his being. And so we can use that as the highest example. That's called Ishvara or Ishvari. And he and Holy Mother epitomized that the best. And we're so fortunate to have them. So I'm speaking to all of you who have taken mantra diksha and so forth. You have as your guru, Swami Vivekananda, and you have as your Lord and Master, Sri Ramakrishna, and you have as your mother, the Holy Mother herself. So that's an incomparable state of life that you've reached when you've come that far. And it really means the death of ignorance and the non-return of the soul to embodiment anymore, unless you take on the body consciously, as Vivekananda said. Well, should a man be reborn? They asked him. He said, I certainly hope he will not unless he can do so in full consciousness. So there are many penultimate goals, you might say, to reach before that ultimate goal of being completely stripped bare in non-dual awareness, or nirvikalpa samadhi, occurs to us if we should be so fortunate. Because, as I'm saying, even in this day and age, if you look amongst Sri Ramakrishna and his inner circle, there were very few of them who had nirvikalpa samadhi while they were in the body. Very few. And the ones that did and tried to describe it, of course, were at a complete loss for words. So it's good to entertain and envision such things. Beyond imagination is envisionment, and then beyond envisionment is the realization of divine reality. So we step from one to the other, and hopefully we'll posit all our eggs in one basket eventually. That is, we will invest everything in absolute reality, and then be able to support in the body. It's a very good story for that, actually. Sri Ramakrishna said the turtle lays its eggs on the sand, buries its eggs in the sand, but then it goes swimming in the ocean. So that's the soul who goes back to formlessness and swims in the ocean of Brahman or bliss. Anandam, Satchidanandam. But nevertheless, the turtle swimming in the ocean, she still has her mind on the eggs buried in the sand. So wherever we go, then we have to make sure that we have our mind fully concentrated at the feet of the Mother of the Universe. May she, the primal guide, our refuge be. She who since birth has ever led us on through paths of trouble to perfection's goal. Mother, wise in her own sweet and playful ways. She who has ever and always illumined our understanding. She, the mother, she, my all, is my resort, whether my work overflow with full fruition or with none, as Vivekananda wrote in one of his verses on the Divine Mother. So keep your eyes on the prize, and then move about the world as an automaton.
Yeah, something else that Ramakrishna would talk about or talks about in the gospel that is incredibly inspiring from a being of his nature who is clearly has no coverings, is a knower of Brahman. He still stands from this position that doesn't, at least this is what he was saying to one group of people. He doesn't like to say I am Brahman. He likes to say I am an instrument of Mother. I am still acting at her will. So even though he knows he can say that highest Mahavakya and be in full recognition of it, he still wants to go from the position of I'm an instrument of this. Like being in a body will remain as an instrument and be at the will of Mother. At least that's how I was reading it. And if you don't mind expanding on that a bit, because I just think it's such a beautiful stance to take. Like even if you reach the highest goal of liberation, you still in body want to act under as knowing that you're acting out of the will of Mother, that you're not a doer, you're not doing anything.
Right. Other than maybe Ramana Maharshi, there's probably no person I can think of who had less problem with the ego than Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. But nevertheless, both of them, because Lexington used to have a picture on the wall of his library with, on one side was Sri Ramakrishna and the other side was Ramana Maharshi, as if it were like the same person. And they do look and seem much the same. But both of them were aware of the ego. They had the least problem with it, but they were aware of it. So that's really what you're talking about. It's called the despoiler. See, that gets in the way of this perfect communion between Jivatman and Paramatman, or between the individualized soul and the supreme soul. It gets in the way of most people in a very ugly way. It's very, until the line of demarcation between God and mankind is so thick that God doesn't exist anymore. But in the case of the devotees, they make this line thinner and thinner. Sri Ramakrishna said, like a line drawn on water. It makes the pool of water look like two for just an instant, but then it goes away. And so the devotees spend their time trying to ripen the ego because, like I said, Sri Ramakrishna was aware of it. He said, "Oh, the ego, you'll never get rid of it." People would walk up to him and say, "How can I get rid of my ego?" And he said, "Oh, that'll never happen, but you can diminish it, and deflate it, and ripen it. That is, turn it to God, offer it at the feet of the mother, and then pakvahamkara. Ahamkara is the ego, so pakvahamkara, it'll ripen, and then it'll cause the least amount of trouble. It'll be less obtrusive in that relationship. And at that point, you can decide whether or not you want to give it up. If you don't give it up, it's called bhakti, or qualified non-dualism. If you do give it up, it's called atmagyan, or advaita, non-dualism. And there's no reason why souls that are facile can't do both, like come in and out of those states, like bees coming in and out of Mother Kali's hair. They'll be aware of form, and then they'll be aware of formlessness. So there is a sort of way of having your cake and eating it too in the Vedantic tradition. If you, I think it would be based on the fact that you need to have the non-dual experience though, and that's very rare. Most people will gravitate to a position of thick ignorance when they get into the physical sheath. Other beings will fight against that and try to raise themselves like a hot air balloon, charge up the chitta, he used to say. That is your thoughts, keep it charged every day. And then it'll, like a hot air balloon, it'll rise. Otherwise, it'll be like rainwater, always falling into the lowest place. So the mind has to be trained like a puppy, like your own personal puppy. And if you do that just once in this lifetime, if you do it with a guide, with a path, and with the revealed scriptures, that's the triple gem there, the three great sources, then you won't ever have to do it again. You'll be able to have higher experiences where the gravity doesn't pull you down, and you're always floating on these upper air currents like Sri Ramakrishna was. It may seem like a windless day out, he said, but put a kite up 50 feet in the air and you'll see how much wind is blowing up there. So he would say the wind of God's grace is always blowing. You just have to raise the kite to catch it, or raise your sail to catch it. And so that's the divine preoccupation. If all you do is just work and sleep and eat, then, which seems to be man's business on earth, when you look at everything from the outside, then you're missing out on all these divine blissful subtleties that are your divine inheritance. And so just, being reborn again in ignorance is not the worst of it, I think. The worst of it is missing out on this divine inheritance that is yours. Like you're born rich, but you never find these riches. And you need to then, as Jesus said, store them up in heaven. That is, or Buddha said, adding Dharma drops to your bucket. You have to get a bucket and collect these Dharma drops while you're living. And then they'll really hold you in good stead for your whole life, for all your lives. So probably you could say the penultimate goal of everything is just destroying your ignorance. doesn't mean getting learned in worldly knowledge. It means destroying the ignorance that separates you from knowing your identity with the Atman. Nothing should be able to keep you and that apart, because the truth of it is they're inseparable anyway. So the victory is already won, as Mother Scriptures say. The victory is already won, but you're forgetting to account for it. Who else has a question today for Satsang?
Babaji, namaste. Sorry for being late. I wanted to. I have a cross question in regards to that. So, a lot of time ordinary people consider God as being personal, and people who have knowledge consider it to be more impersonal. I wanted to understand this, that when you consider God as impersonal, then the only thing that is separating you from God is your own ignorance. And so so the way for people who think of God as impersonal is knowing what is true, and knowing the precepts of Vedanta. What I'm just trying to get to a better approach for this impersonal aspect of God, and because as beings, we have separate identities, and we tend to think on the basis of personal relationships. We also consider ourselves as separate beings. I'm sorry to elaborate on this, and it's not coming up to be a question. It's just I'm kind of sharing my thoughts on this subject. As beings, we naturally consider ourselves as being personal entities, and it seems like naturally there's this separation, that there's God, and then there's us, limited beings with limited minds, and then, well, it's kind of
there's a way of speaking about it. I want to eat sugar, or I want to be sugar. That's basically the simplest way it was put when people asked Ramakrishna about the apparent conundrum or dichotomy of God with form and God beyond form. So you either want to eat sugar or you want to be sugar, and most people want to eat sugar. I mean, it's not the best analogy if you're a health food buff, but you can just take the analogy as it is. But we could say honey or nectar, but most people, are dualists. I mean, most people, I'm talking about among the devotees, the greater amount of percentage of people are just worldly. They're pig ignorant. They don't know anything about spirituality, even if they say they do. A lot of people who call themselves religionists are not religionists at all. So all they really love is the world and their pleasures and money and fame and power over others. It must be obvious to you by now. And none of that is religion whatsoever. That's irreligion. That's what the beings like Vivekananda come to earth to help destroy, including the superstitions around religion. So, like I say, don't get me started on that. But back to the main point is that amongst the devotees, the greater percentage of them will prefer to enjoy God in all as many different ways as possible. Even the yogis want exquisite enjoyment. They'll get that out of objects, whereas other people are just getting the cross section of pain and suffering and pleasure from objects. But if you can take the tantric ideal and just deify everything, turn everything into Brahman, or practice it doing that, then you're always going to be aware of this line of demarcation between matter and spirit, and creature and creator, and God and mankind. And that line is a problem for the non-dualists, but it's a great blessing and joy for the dualists. So this is why when we asked my teacher, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and blessings be upon him, when we asked him about that section in the Gospel of Ramakrishna where people had asked him about eating sugar or being sugar, and Sri Ramakrishna had mentioned that what I'm saying here is that most people prefer really to eat sugar. But Sri Ramakrishna was one who had become sugar. He had had the non-dual experience. Again, that's extremely rare, even amongst illumined souls, like his 16 direct disciples. Only a couple of them had that non-dual experience, plus Holy Mother. And so it's a very, very rare thing to have, and you're going to have to be ready to give everything up. I mean, that is the face of Kali right there. You say you're a Kali worshiper. Well, if she gets a hold of you, you better be ready to go formless and lose everything. Those who misery love and hug the form of death, to them the mother comes. That's Kali the mother. That's not Lakshmi the mother or Saraswati the mother. That's the aspect of mother that's purely formless or has a formless form. And that's a transforming power of Shakti there you're talking about. That's the cremation ground Shakti. She's going to turn everything to ashes along with her consort Shiva. So when we asked my teacher about being sugar or eating sugar and asked him what was his opinion on that, we said, well, what do you think, Swami? Most people say they want to eat sugar, not be sugar. And Swami said, that's because no one knows the bliss of being sugar. So it means nobody here on earth, except for a handful of rare souls, have had that non-dual experience yet. And, it's actually the main reason why you're meditating, whether you know it or not, is to, when they tell you, for instance, watch your breath, or when they tell you, for instance, try and stop your thoughts, like Patanjali, stop the vrittis from vibrating. They're just kind of delivering the message of you're about to die to everything you know in a sweet package. You see, so they're going to lead you onto a formless meditation just by telling you to stop your thoughts. But when you stop your thoughts, you'll see two things. You'll see fear and you'll see bliss. And which one are you going to go towards? So this is why Mother Kali is showing you this. You see, be fearless. This is the Abhaya Mudra. And so if you put yourself at her feet and you really are seeking formlessness or non-dual awareness or Satchidananda or Nirvikalpa or Asampragyata or what Zen calls Satori or Buddhism calls Nirvana, then you're going to have to commit to that experience and have that unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss that is the nature of reality. So that's a good way of talking about it. But then, you can come back to name and form, and then when you come back out of a state like that, Sri Ramakrishna said it's like putting on colored glasses. Like you put on yellow glasses and you see everything yellow. Or you put on green glasses and see everything green. So when you come out of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you look at the world that before just looked like the world to you, and now it's colored Brahman, because you've put on those glasses of, you've had that formless experience. And when I say few people have had Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I'm really saying in its totality. There are more people who have glimpses of it. They have glimpses of light, and they have glimpses of, it's described in the Upanishads, like sparks, like fireflies, like the sound of a piccolo, like a sound of a kettle drum. All of a sudden, vision and vision and hearing become interned, and they turn into Om and Jyoti, or Shabda and Jyoti. They turn into divine sound and divine light. That's why suns are shining in the night sky, because of that light. That's the only light that really shines. Everything else is just an imitation of that, or some sort of inferior duplication of it. So when you see that light, then it begins to blind you to the presence of Maya and the presence of your own ignorance. It takes it away, so that you begin to live in a state like Sri Ramakrishna was in. When you read about him in the gospel, you can almost taste it and smell it and hear it. You can sense how profound and powerful his experiences were. And same with the direct disciples. Even as young boys, when they came to him, they were having mind-boggling meditations as teenagers. So just by being around him. So it's like coming close to a pillar of fire, a huge pillar of fire. You just can't help but feel that warmth and be impressed by that, the depth and profundity of what's there, the deep vibration of it. And so we moisten our minds every day by reading those accounts. And then, we try and realize them through manana, through contemplating them. And then we take them apart through satsang like today in questions and think about them more, because where else do you get to do this but with people who are what we call holy company? Where else do you find it? Anywhere in the world. Where else have you found it since you were born? She, through who since birth has ever led me on through paths of trouble to perfection's goal. Everything's paths of trouble out there until you find your compass and set it towards God. And then find an experienced mariner who can set your compass and guide you and send you in the right direction. So all of this is sporting about in the realm of duality, and that's eating sugar. So, but you have to remember, when you eat sugar, you get some indigestion. You see, if you are sugar, you don't get that. So it really comes down to temperaments. If you're a bhakti temperament, then you're going to your sport is going to be a combination of exquisite pleasure and intense suffering, because the intense suffering comes when you can't find him or you can't find her. True suffering, the worldly people know nothing about that. they think that some diseases or some whatever is suffering, you see, or death is suffering. That's not suffering. Suffering is when you're separated from the Lord, who you cast eye upon once and saw nothing to compare to him or her in the three worlds, and then lost sight of him or her. And that'll happen to the bhaktas all the time. That's why they have to dance like the Sufis. That's why they have to sing like the bhaktas. They have to, the Gyanis have to moisten their minds with Dharma. You know, it's all for the sake of love. Nothing can equal love, and not even compassion. So that's what it's all for the sake of. But it's just a matter of what your temperament's like. Shankara was supposed to be this very dry Gyani, but he wrote songs to Annapurna and Bhavani and Shiva and Dakshinamurti. And they asked him once, do you have any devotion? He said, my devotion is to discrimination. So he was devoted to the wisdom that removed ignorance so that he could love God fully. Because if ignorance is there, you're loving God in all the wrong places at all the wrong times. Isn't it the case here? It's like, deciding you want to cut a skylight in your roof. You see? So you get up there with a circular saw and you start cutting away because you're going to cut a skylight to let more light into the room. But all of a sudden the clouds gather. Pretty soon you've got a thunderstorm, you see. And you're down in your kitchen, water's leaking through and all the tar and everything is seeping down into your kitchen floor and everything's wet and you can't fix it. You have to throw a tarp over it till the sun comes out. So everything is bad timing here, you see. I'm recounting an experience that my older brother had once. He decided to cut a hole in his kitchen ceiling to have a skylight. It's just wrong timing, you see. So anyway, that eat sugar, be sugar, there's another way of saying it, is that sometimes, as Sri Ramakrishna said, the cooling influence of the devotees takes the water of non-dual existence and turns it into an iceberg. So some beings want, everything is Brahman, but some beings want to see Brahman in form. Well, that's not really possible, because as John said, no man has seen God with these eyes. You can't really bring God into the realm of form. He, it, she, whatever it is, won't come. Form is a false superimposition. Form is an aspect of Maya, along with name, time, space, and cause and effect. So Brahman stays far free from all those things. So when you're playing with Maya, then you better keep your pole star as Ishvara, because that's God with form. And that God is also in Maya, but it knows Maya. Other forms are in Maya and they don't know Maya. We don't even have a word for it anywhere on this earth except in India. So you better keep your pole star fixed on that Supreme Soul who is God with form and increase your devotion to it as much as you can. And any ignorance is in the way, you get rid of it by knowledge. The Lord of love, Sri Krishna, says that himself. To those who love me, I give them the discrimination, the discriminating wisdom by which they can come to me. So you'll have to get rid of your ignorance because it won't fit into the realm of the Lord. You can't pass an elephant through the eye of a needle. So these are all the four yogas, is why I started out this whole session by saying the new religion of the age is the four yogas. I mean, I read the Sandilya Bhakti Sutras the other day and didn't agree with half of it. And then, I read the Atmagyan scriptures the other day, agreed with all of it. So you're going to have to find a great light like Vivekananda, recognize him, and then do what he says. And what he says is to take these 4 yogas and make them equal in you. I mean, you have 4 kinds of breaths, right? You have in breath, you have held breath, you have out breath, and you have another held breath at the end of those 3. So just like those are one breath, you take the 4 yogas and you make them one yoga. And so if one of them's deficient, like say if you're breathing and you go, basically you're not holding your breath at all. So you'll never know what kumbhaka is like. When in meditation this morning, my concentration was on kumbhaka. I'm going to let my air out and not breathe again. And all of a sudden I heard the divine sounds in my head, just by concentrating on not breathing. So everything is right there, simple, in your grasp. You just have to experience it with some kind of depth and concentration. Now we will talk about concentration. And that's the first sutra of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Now concentration is being talked about. Concentration is everything. Doesn't matter if you're a jnana or a bhakti or a raja yogi. Concentration is going to have to be there. So if you can master that, you're a success in the world, you're a success on earth, you're a success in the heavens, and you're a success in spiritual life. One point in concentration accomplishes it all, but how now you have to keep that constant. You don't fall out of it. I went and meditated for an hour today. I closed my eyes and God existed. Then I opened my eyes, and for the other 23 hours, God didn't exist anymore. You see, no, it's not like that. God exists whether the eyes are open or whether they're closed. So that's where you're going to have to exist. Unbroken concentration. You can't fall out of it, not even when you're sleeping. And definitely not when you're eating. That food is essential to realization. That food is Brahman. Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir. So in this way, you close all the gaps in your thinking process so that Maya can't seep in anymore, and become a well-rounded devotee. Not just one yoga, or maybe 2. You have to have all 4, and you have to increase them exponentially until they are one integrated whole, which is what they're supposed to be anyway. So if the devotees love to congeal the water of existence into an iceberg called Ishvara, then most icebergs melt again when the sun of wisdom rises, Ramakrishna said. And then it's all back to liquid life again. So it's one homogeneous mass of pure conscious awareness. So, but that one iceberg that got congealed by the love of millions and millions of souls, even on earth alone, a Christ, a Buddha, a Krishna, doesn't melt at the end of time, at its cycles of time. And it comes back again in the memory of souls in the next cycle. So that Ishvara form is then very important to all cycles of time. And so anyway, the eating and being of sugar and the iceberg forming and melting are 2 ways in which Ramakrishna tried to explain this problem people have, or sometimes even this debate or argument that God is with form, God is beyond form. He said God is with form and beyond both form and formlessness as well. So he's not willing to put any limitations on Brahman, no matter what it does or seems to do or doesn't do. And that's the stuff of non-dual realization.
May I ask a follow-up question to Abhinay's question?
Certainly,
Thank you.
yeah.
So is it important that I know sort of which direction my temperament is closer to and say, well, I'm primarily a bhakta or I'm primarily a jnani? Or could I just say, I'm just going to follow the path and go where it takes me? And, if mother wants me to realize the goal this way or that way, then, I'll just keep doing the practice.
It's one of the things that the potential disciple and the guru, shishya and guru, they call that. It's one of the things that they discuss before an initiation is taken up. We have to find out what your temperament is. The guru already knows what his temperament is, and has long since, for decades or maybe even lifetimes, has been living in that realization. But the student is coming forth maybe with a lot of the mind in a scattered state and hasn't pulled together into that concentration I was just talking about, has not pulled it all together into what is my ideal, who do I love most, and what's the best method for contemplating it based on my temperament. I mean, those are basically the 3 or 4 elements that you have to find out about yourself before you put your foot on a path. Otherwise, so many people, even without a guru or without taking mantra or taking too many mantras or too many gurus, they don't come down to that the definitive step on a traditional path and make headway. They don't dig one deep well. They dig a bunch of shallow wells. So they never find water, particularly the water of non-duality. And so it's very important then to find that in yourself. In that way, it's maybe a funny analogy is maybe sort of like dating, you don't know who you like yet when you're in high school. So you get to go out on dates with a few women or men, you see. And then you find out who you like and who you don't like. Maybe you find out you don't like any of them. You become a monk. So whatever the case may be, that's sort of like finding your ideal inside of you. Who do you love? You see, who are you going to call, kind of thing. Ghostbusters being ignorance. The ghosts are ignorance. You want to bust them out of your head, and you do that by your divine love for one particular ideal. Ishta, nishta. Very important in India. Ishtam means your ideal, nishta means your one-pointed devotion towards it. Doesn't mean that you can't love others. You love them all eventually. You learn to love them all. But basically that's that one that, take a look at the world. Don't most Caucasians look like Middle Easterners, and don't most Buddhists look like Easterners? The what you've loved all your life is stamped on your very features, and then it's called religion later. Some of them look like Buddha, some of them look like Jesus, some of them look like Muhammad. There's a reason for that. I think, particularly in America, we don't look at those reasons. Those reasons aren't important to us. That's why you can be Jew but not practice. You can be Christian but not practice. You can be Muslim and not practice. You see, because you're not looking at the reasons that are stamped on the very features of your face. What am I? Where did I come from? Who am I is a better word, a better saying. And that's not just who am I? I'm the Atman, I'm not the world kind of thing. It's who am I? Where have I been in all my lifetimes? You can polish up your shoes really nicely, but we can still see where you've been in the cracks of your shoes, where you've walked, you see. And gurus can see that. And so they make that determination when they look at you. Sri Ramakrishna could look at you and know everything about your past lifetimes. Just with a minute with you, he knew you. And a lot of that is on your features, as I said. That's why you look in the mirror, you see, not to primp yourself and comb your hair and make yourself look better to attract somebody for the wrong reasons and then have it all fall apart later. You look there to see who you are, where you've been. So am I a devotional temperament? Am I a studious temperament? Am I a contemplative temperament? Am I an active temperament? And then when you find those, you'll become aware of the other three. You find one temperament, you'll become aware of basically of the other three. And you might see those deficiencies in one or two of them and want to begin working on those. But at least you'll have a place to establish yourself, a secure footing in spiritual life. So you'll start off with a particular ideal and a particular practice, like Krishna and Bhakti Yoga, or Shankara and Advaita, or Jesus and faith, Buddha and compassion. You'll start off with a certain kind of thing that goes with your temperament, and then you're set upon the path, and you can incorporate and bring everything else together later. Sammanvaya, Mahacharya, like Sri Ramakrishna, just bringing everything together so nicely in all ways. Sammanvaya Mahacharya, Yuga Dharma Swarupinam, was the essence of all dharmas of this yuga. So that was given to him by Mother Kali. And so there you have an example of somebody who had a very powerful ideal. I think we have reached the time, and we need to be on time quitting so that we can have our hours rest or study, better yet, and then return with God blogs. I put 4 or 5 of those up, a couple very powerful, one of them on the Tanmatras, that was on Thursday. So review those if you have a mind to be ready with your homework, and we'll break here, and then we'll come back for God blogs in an hour. Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirman Gamoya, Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamoya, Abhira Mayeti, Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukam, Tenamam Pai Nityam, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om peace, peace, peace.